What is up, guys? Nonchalant Movie Guy here. It's been a while, so I hope you've all been doing well, staying busy, hitting the gym, enjoying life and such. Uh, but anyway, so the drama, yeah, it's a pretty interesting one. The drama, as in the movie, the drama that just came out, I think, a few weeks ago. It's so interesting, actually. I decided to get my chud ass up off my bed to write a semi-coherent script for this video. So let's get right to it. I want to start by saying I won't be yapping so hard on the film, cinematography, and soundtrack, and sets, and all that stuff due to the movie's incredible symbolism and metaphorical elements and implications. And so the video is going to be a little bit of a sort of unconventional, just rant type of thing. I just really wanted to talk about it, so probably going to have some like Far Cry 3 gameplay in the background. Not going to really edit this too hard, just want to put my thoughts out there. And since, like I've stated in the title, I am a psychology major, so I kind of dabble with the Freud and the Bandura and Skinner and, so yeah, I know what I'm talking about. I'm actually not a psych major, but my mom has 20 years of experience in the field, so, tomato, tomato, I'm basically born into it. No, but seriously, I do think this movie has a lot to say, and it's controversial for a very good reason. I've heard a lot of interesting takes, right? Some good and some, well, just interesting. And so I thought, heck, why not jump into it? This little guy thinks he has something to say too. So to start, a little plot refresher off the good old Google. The drama, an A24 romantic black comedy directed by Christopher Borgli, follows a happily engaged couple, Emma and Charlie, whose relationship unravels during their wedding week after a shocking, drunken confession about a dark secret from Emma's past. The film, similar to a cringe comedy, centers on the couple navigating moral quandaries, trust, and the consequences of this revelation. So, yeah, that kind of encompasses the entire conflict in the movie. So with that, right, we kind of pass the cute little setup for our lovely couple. We get these scenes of them, practicing the dance and how they met and all this stuff. And we get into our first real conflict of the film, which takes place in this sort of dance hall, I think the ballroom where they're gonna have the wedding at. They're all sitting and drinking and stuff together. We've got these friends sharing a few cups of wine, and they start to share the worst thing they've ever done. We get Mike's story of being a beta who hid behind his girlfriend while being attacked by a dog, sort of hinting at some stuff that we'll get into later. And we get into the now infamous Rachel's story, one where she says she locked a slow kid in a closet and left him to be found hours or days later by the cops. Edward says he cyberbullied someone, and Emma drops the bombshell that is, well, she planned a school shooting and almost went through with it. Rachel crashes out by trauma-dump competition maxing how her cousin, who nobody knew about, by the way, was a victim of gun violence. Emma pukes, and they all go home. Now, I know I said I wouldn't touch on the cinematography and shit, but I will say Christopher Borgil's direction is perfect. Absolute cinema. He showcased his skills with Dream Scenario really well, blending these internal mental thought process scenes and dreams together, but he upped it way up in this movie. We start to see the drift between Emma and Charlie, cuts of Charlie's anxieties and thoughts running crazy, from a dream of Emma shooting up their wedding, to Emma having a gut-punching thought of Charlie laughing off the previous night, and them both being okay. He's really, really good at showing their individual internal tension, and I love it so much. It elevates its humor and darkness really, really well. We see them start to drift mentally, and we begin to see Charlie's sort of weird dilemma in all this. He's someone who overfixates on things, something Emma stated for the audience before, and this overfixation on the situation causes him to want to get to the bottom of why she even considered the idea to begin with. Robert Pattinson's acting and or interpretation of the character and the writing, and my psych intuition, yes, indubitably, kind of gives me the idea that Charlie himself was either exposed to a lot of trauma or even abused as a child himself, if not betrayed, abandoned, or he at least grew up to need to figure things out on his own, validate his own feelings, reassure himself, and this is why he grows up to become this helpful, but also nearly overbearingly anxious guy who crumbles under his own impulses. Yes, indubitably. Charlie is someone who might have never gotten the answers as to why things had happened in his life, whatever they may be, and so that sort of wiring in his brain works to problem solve and maybe even be an open-minded person, like Emma states during that photo shoot scene. But it also makes him someone who, when stressed and freaking out, can really cause some damage. Emma then starts to crack open. We actually get to see why as Charlie helps her open up about her past. We learn she grew up moving a lot, was bullied, and didn't have many friends, which again, from the scenes alone, I can kind of picture when exactly the issue started or how. Again, partly because I'm wittily so intuitive, but also, yeah, to any real psych majors out there, I'm probably projecting my own traumas onto these characters, but hear me out, okay? Emma says that she has no friends and moved a lot. That puts her in a spot where she doesn't really learn to make friends, to sustain them, to trust in the stability of her own daily life, enough to embrace, friendships and things like that. That also means interactions with people in general. The compliments, the jokes, the insults, and the fights. So as she grew older and kept feeling this sort of lacking foundation in her life, she grew to take shit like, ever heard of deodorant, insanely personal. And when a kid grows up isolated and in their head a lot, these super intense feelings can lead to some pretty extreme solutions. Everything that hurt Emma as a teenager was extreme. Her anger, her hate of the world, her loneliness, because it's all she had going on in her head. Which is why thinking the aesthetic of mass shootings, as she says, was interesting and something she gravitated towards. An only child who doesn't know how to regulate her feelings and has no friends, plus the internet, is a very real thing I think most people don't really think about. And at first, this being her deep dark secret did kind of come off to me a little shock factor baity, but the way the backstory continued to evolve really changed my perception of it. A teenager like Emma is absolutely someone who would struggle with empathy. And it's honestly, again, as a psych major here, no surprise it took her to hear of another shooting and to witness and observe how upset it made her classmates to cause her to reflect and even fake it until she actually felt it, to embrace empathy, and on top of that, to become an advocate against the kind of violence she wanted to commit. Like, I don't know, man. To me, that sounds like a pretty fucking redeemable childhood trauma situation. She even says in the movie it felt like waking up from a nightmare, when Charlie asked her if she simply didn't do it just because another person did it first. The way this film tackles empathy is amazing to me. I've noticed that people tend to gravitate towards bad thing or bad thought equals bad person, or that children shouldn't be able to learn the consequences of their actions early on in their life. And I think on some deep, real shit in IRL land, kids nowadays do get neglected in that way. Or at least, being first world bias here in America or first world countries, empathy is a weird sort of trait that is numbing itself out, from brain rot to the instant access to doomer core shit, right? I mean, shit, I hear some grown-ass adults talk about shit they've done and just barely understanding empathy or what it means to care about someone other than themselves, and these guys are like 25, 35, 42, barely realizing, oh, what I do to others hurts, and I've gone through that too, and that's why I shouldn't do that.
I think only in these past couple of years have I gained the ability empathy. And
so clearly we've got an empathy problem, and I think people should stop pretending like empathy is an inherent trait amongst people, or humans, We are an inherently violent species, and to assume everyone, even children, don't have dark thoughts or tendencies or feelings and impulses actually does more damage than good. That accountability without scrutiny is an okay thing. That thoughts and feelings aren't facts. That honestly, unless you're like Rachel, they aren't something to be ridiculed and imprisoned for or shunned out for the rest of your life for. The difference, again, being able to distinguish thoughts and actions. This honestly just makes me reflect on a current Gen Z issue, or what I think is one of the issues we got today. And it's this general, overly anxious and hyper-fixated need to be morally just or politically correct about everything. And in this current space, you're either, for personal reasons or not, the person worrying about it or freaking out about being on the right side, or you're the one who's got the moral high ground complex and who thinks it's their duty to call shit out. Basically, you're either a Rachel, a Charlie, or an Emma. I think this movie is bringing in a ton of controversy because of this exact need to be on the right side of the story. There's people who are agreeing with Rachel, others who are defending Emma, and others who are just coming up with their own answers. I think it's amazing when a movie does that. Truly, it's so cool to see something like this open up this discussion. Anyway, this brings me to fucking Rachel. Let's call out Rachel's deal. So I just went over these sorts of archetypes, right? Rachel is someone who definitely falls under this sort of hero complex and is written to be a very specific kind of person. She embodies something I like to call the trauma-maxing competition factor. This whole thing explodes out of control because she brings up her cousin, who was a victim to gun violence, someone who Charlie didn't even remember, the cousin who, by the way, doesn't even really agree with having a relationship with Rachel to begin with. She used her cousin, who isn't even relevant, to morally judge Emma based off of a thought process and a state of vulnerability. She honestly always had it out for her, but clearly she was manipulating the fuck out of the situation, and she won. Because Charlie folded and started being a beta and overthinking her, shooting up their wedding and all this crazy shit. And I think this is the meat and bones right there. She did do a bad thing. Rachel. Locking that special needs kid in the closet, who she doesn't even admit to him being special needs, by the way. She was super defensive about the labeling too, which is just like, dude, holy shit, whatever. She racially profiles her own husband as someone who's afraid of guns because he's black and creates a false backstory of lore for it. She sees Emma's secret as something worse than her own because of something someone she knew went through, something we didn't even know the context to, and she's punishing Emma for something she felt, unwilling to empathize with her past and why she may have almost went through with the shooting. Which brings me back to the empathy thing. Emma learned through seeing what her actions could have done. She saw the effects. She learned from the consequences of her actions, or not actions, but intentions. This allowed her, in theory, to become a more open-minded person. Rachel didn't learn from her mistakes. She locked the kid away, she lied about it, and took no accountability for it just because the kid was found later by the police. She never learned any remorse, any guilt, or any empathy, except for when someone she cared about got hurt. Couple that with the current political sphere, and now you got someone banking off someone else's pain, weaponizing trauma, and using politically correct takes to punish someone she doesn't like. She doesn't actually care about her cousin. She hardly knows her. She cares about being better than Emma, and taking the moral high ground in the situation makes her a better person. So she used it to humiliate her and judge her. And people like that are everywhere. Shit, I know a few myself. It's crazy actually how well Rachel was written. On my first viewing, I had a guy screaming out, "Fuck you, Snaggletooth." And it's like, damn, what the fuck does Alana Haim have to do with this? She was that good as this character that she had mans crashing out over her looks. Anyway, I definitely think this movie's deeper commentary is one of judgment, today's current politically correct sort of cutthroat societal norms, and the diminishing effect of a lack of empathy. From growing up an only child to growing up a judgmental manipulator to a bystander or an overthinker. Every character showcases a different but equally distinctive personality that we all have grown to adopt. It's normal now to hide things, to normalize fronting, to not tell your partner your secrets out of fear of being canceled or called a freak or a monster. It's normal to fake being perfect and overly kind and just, or at least normal to pretend like you care. Again, Rachel, I really fucking hate that lady, by the way. Holy fuck. Moving on. Another thing that got my psych muscle and my brain pumping was Charlie and his past. All we got is bros from the UK, he has both his parents, and he cyberbullied someone to move away. Now, first thing, I think it isn't stated, but I think Charlie's fixation stems from a societal difference between Emma and Charlie. Charlie, if we're assuming he's someone who has recently moved to the States, wouldn't be the kind of guy used to the idea of gun violence, I wouldn't put it past me that if I got a boyfriend who's from the UK, where anything besides a machete or an Excalibur is illegal as fuck to own as a citizen for self-defense, and then heard that I almost shot up a bunch of people, would react too well to that. So I don't know if that's intentional or not, but cool little detail that I kind of noticed about it. And the second thing is more of a reach, and I know I kind of touched on it earlier, but I can kind of relate to Charlie in the overthinking department. I really do think Charlie is someone who might have grown up either having gone through some sort of abandonment or some kind of emotionally manipulative trauma. He overthinks the slaps during funny dance time in bed. He starts to box his fiancée in this idea of her as a teenager, basically getting the ick. He starts to imagine her shooting up the wedding. He fixates on finding out where the trauma came from. He lies about her witnessing her friend's death to try and validate himself on why Emma would have thought of something like that. All of that gives me the idea that Charlie overgeneralizes. Let me flex my psych vocab here. He catastrophizes, right? He assumes the worst from finding out the secret. He kind of embodies this black and white thinking that's a pretty universal anxiety-based cognitive distortion. Oh yeah, I'm cooking. You thought I was joking, huh? Yeah, I actually know a thing or two, buddy. No, but seriously, think about it with the black and white thinking. Mans goes out of his way, trying to make sense of it, needing to convince himself and others that it isn't that bad, because he thinks it is, and he still loves her. Maybe he sees this secret as a means to end the relationship, but his feelings won't allow it. So he goes around freaking out about it, fighting off this middle ground and bouncing between leave wife or treat it like it never happened, eventually leading him to crashing out when a coworker doesn't take the bait and gives her own opinion, which is, calling the cops in this hypothetical situation he threw at her, and in a fit of emotions ends up almost full-blown cheating with this lady, which he still cheated, don't get me wrong, but anyway, Clearly, he is someone who spirals out when it comes to the idea of, one, not knowing everything about his partner, or when his perception of his partner is challenged, and two, when his catastrophizing is coupled with his black and white filter. He becomes fearful of his fiancée holding a knife, he throws away a mug because he thinks it'll enable her to be violent, he lets his thoughts go rampant, he tries to get to the bottom of the lore, but only to reassure himself, really, and to prove everyone else was wrong, to again reassure himself that his false sense of fear of his partner isn't real, and then fumbling it anyway. So I don't know, to be honest, but I definitely think he's got some lore too that they just didn't tap into. But I think if you're the kind of person that's actually into psychology or a kind of intuitive person, you would kind of pick up on his backstory. And that's definitely giving props to the script, but most importantly, Robert Pattinson in embodying this sort of archetype. Anyway, the only kind of okay one is Mike, which if I were to generalize him based off of what's in the movie, is that he can be kind of a coward, a pushover. But besides that, he clearly doesn't agree with how Rachel acts at some points in the movie and even tries to de-escalate a lot, so I don't know. I'm on Emma's side on this, to be honest, and I'm glad Charlie at the end is now on the same playing field as Emma. And now they've both got terrible things they've done. Now they both truly know each other, and I think they're both happier for it. Both willing to try anew, to restart the relationship with their marriage, and yeah, that's beautiful to me. Which brings me again to the idea I brought up of this movie kind of working as a social experiment in a way to me, because where I took it as being beautiful, this chick took it as you should never tell your partners everything. So, I don't know, clearly we all took something different from this movie, but yeah, this was truly an interesting one. A great watch, really well written, well acted, has a lot of commentary on a lot of things, some subtle and some not so subtle. And I truly think it's a great reflection of the times. Basically, try not to judge a book by its cover and try to have a little faith in your partner. Don't let Gen Z Karens gaslight and dictate your relationship based off some childhood lore and what your teenage fiance almost did. Instead, take the opportunity to laugh it off, get to know her, embrace each other's flaws, don't cheat on her, and be closer because of it. Show that Rachel at your wedding that love prevails past the suffocating need to be politically correct about everything, even your feelings. Maybe being vulnerable and actually honest about your thoughts and feelings is the new punk rock. Closing thoughts. I think Edward just didn't go through enough trauma or is just too beta to get Emma. Like if I were with Emma, I'd be like, yeah, valid. Let's unpack that, sweetie, but I still love you, you know? And I would have loved her slapping the shit out of me during dancing bedtime, but that's just me. I'm just a freakster, what can I say? Basically, that's kind of it. Not really a review, I guess, but yeah, hope you enjoyed that. I wasn't going to make this, but I'm seeing a ton of people put their takes out there, and some of them are pretty crazy. Not that they're wrong. Movies are subjective, right? But I think it's interesting how this movie is making people reflect on their own experiences and ideologies. Some are doubling down, some are picking sides, some are learning new things from it, and yeah, I think that's cool. But please, if you take anything from it, is that you should not hide things from your partner, and stay the fuck away from Rachel's, man. Like I said, I know a few, and if you don't have the mental fortitude to see through some of the shit these Rachels is saying, man, you're gonna end up like Charlie. Don't be a Charlie. Do not be a Charlie. Anyways, hope you enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe, and thanks for watching. Bye.